Welcome to this video on observables. This is an introductory video on observables, the core type in the RxJS library. In the previous video I discussed a broad overview of what RxJS is, and we used the CDN to have a quick look at what observables are and what RxJS is used for. If you have no idea what RxJS is used for, please take a look at that video. In this video we'll be configuring it with npm and installing it into our local application. And there's this Medium article, and it helps us get us started so we can focus on the RxJS library itself, because there is a little bit of configuration that we'll set up together, and it requires some Webpack and TypeScript, so you don't actually have to be familiar with these. We'll just go through the commands and just set it up. But if you are interested, I do have a video series on TypeScript as well. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, and I'll put this article in the description as well so you can copy these commands. We'll go over and we'll just set up our application. So we'll do an npm init, and we'll do -y because I'll answer yes to all of the questions. So that's created this package.json file here, and we've got this main here of index.js. So we'll need to create that file, but let's go ahead and just install a few dependencies. So we'll go ahead and we'll do npm install RxJS. We're going to need RxJS, of course, Webpack and Webpack dev server, TypeScript, and the TS loader. So we'll go ahead and we'll get those as well. And while that's loading, I might go ahead and create a source folder for our HTML page. So let's go ahead and create that, and I'll call that index.html. And outside of that, I will create a JavaScript file, index.ts, because we want a TypeScript file here. And we'll notice that with the installation in our package.json, we have the latest versions of RxJS and TypeScript and Webpack dev server and TS loader, and these will be in our node modules as well. So the next step that we'll do is we will install the Webpack CLI as a dev dependency, because we will need to be using it for development purposes only. So let's go ahead and install that. Okay, so what we want to do is we can add this scripts here, which uses the Webpack dev server, and that will be in our package.json file. So where our scripts are here, we got this test script here. We can use this start one, so we can run npm start, and that will get that Webpack dev server going. And Webpack essentially bundles all of our modules together in JavaScript, and it can map every module needed and generates one or more bundles. So we can set up the Webpack. So we can make a webpack.config.js. So let's do that. So webpack.config.js, get that, and then we can just go to this article here, link in the description, and we can copy and paste this here into here. Now, one thing to note is we have this, we don't have to know everything here, but we have this entry point here, which will be in source, we'll have an index.ts. So I might put this index.ts file in this source folder, just like that. And okay, so we're resolving TypeScript extension types, and part of the Webpack is we'll have this bundle.js file here. That's what it will sort of do for us behind the scenes, and it will resolve this into a dist folder. So it will create a dist folder, and we can access that bundle.js. So one thing I might do is I might move this index.html out of the source folder, just put it in the root directory, and in there, in that index.html, I can use Visual Studio Code and use Emmet to generate a quick page, and this will be RxJS introduction, and just at the bottom of the body we can have a script source, and this can point to that bundle.js that's being configured by Webpack for us. So we can go ahead and save that. Okay, so the next thing we'll need to do is we'll need to configure TypeScript. So we'll need to make a tsconfig.json, and we can just copy this in there as well. So let's go ahead and create a tsconfig.json, and we copy that in there. Once again, we don't have to know all of this stuff. We just, one thing we may be interested in is the output directory, so they'll be in the dist folder, which isn't created just yet. And okay, so he's creating the index file, and he's just put that bundle there like that. And then we can go ahead and we can just create our code. So let's just check the compiler's working and all that. So we can do let x be a number, and that equals 5. If we save that and we run, let's see here, npm start. Okay, and let's go ahead and just console log that number there. So this is TypeScript, and sort of behind the scenes here, Webpack is bundling up, well, TypeScript compiler is, and we can see if we go to localhost 8080, which is what we configured, it will output that 5 as a console message. So TypeScript is being compiled down into JavaScript, and then the Webpack is sort of bundling up our code for us, and we're referencing that bundled code in this index.html file. So with that, we can go ahead and get started on the observables. So let's go ahead and do that. And okay, so firstly, what is an observable? So an observable is a container for a stream of data. So think of it like observables, they can return multiple values over time, opposed to like regular functions that can only return a single value. So these values can be either asynchronous or synchronous. And let's just go ahead and just see, you know, sort of what it's best explained just by seeing an example, and I'll sort of put into perspective the definition. So we can go ahead and we can just import the observable from RxJS, and probably the first thing that we want to do is just create an observable. So we can just say we can create a constant variable, and we'll just call it observable. And to do this, we use the new keyword. So we're, you know, creating a new instance of an observable. And okay, so So in RxJS, the core concept of observable is a contractual sort of agreement between an observable, which is sort of a wrapper of a stream of data, and an observer. So there is this data that either exists or it's going to exist, and then there's an observer which can sort of observe the that data being in existence, sort of thing. So this will make more sense if we just go ahead and do the example. So when we pass an argument into this new observable, we can pass an observer, and we'll create this in a moment. And for that observer, what we're going to do is we're going to provide a stream of values. So we can, for that observer, and part of the observer, actually this makes more sense if we write down the observer. So an observer, so let's just make our observer. Essentially what the observer is it's an object of 3 different types of parameters. So the first and most important one is the next. So we can define next here like this, and that's going to be some sort of function. It can also take an error, which will be another sort of function, and there will be complete. Oops. Complete. And that's also another function. So this is the sort of agreement that's occurring here, is you have an observable, and this is going to provide sort of the data, and the observer can do something with that, or it can watch it, so to say. So what we can do here is for this observer, it has this next function here, and what that's going to do is it's going to call this sort of code block in here. And it should be noted that we don't explicitly have to write it like an object here. We could pass it directly in here, and we could also just provide next if we wanted to, just provide that one function, but I think it's better to explicitly write it out here and then break it down. So let's just say we have an observable, and we'll just do synchronous data first, and what we want to do is we want to push the values 1, 2, 3 when somebody subscribes, or when the observer subscribes. So let's just do that. So what we want to do is we just want to say next 1, next 2, next 3, next 2, next 3, and okay. So we need to so to invoke the observable and see these values, we need to subscribe to it, and there's a relationship between the observable and the observer, and that's that relationship is sort of what's the word I'm looking for? That the observable and the observer, their contractual agreement with one another is initiated with the subscribe. So an observer has to subscribe to the observable, and the observer can do one of these 3 things, where it can call the next thing to do, an error can occur, or it can complete, and then we can do something. So I guess we need to write what we want to do here. So let's say we have this next, and x can be a number, so the next number, and we'll just console log out got value plus x. And then for the error, we can do something similar, but we might just say, okay, this error could be a string, and we can say console.log, and then maybe we'll just say error, something went wrong, and complete. So console log, this doesn't take anything, and that's just done. So okay, so what we need to do now is we need to subscribe to that observable. So we've created the observable, then we can use this subscribe method, and we pass in the observer that we just created. So let's go ahead and just run this. And okay, so we can see that we've got value 1, got value 2, got value 3, and right now this is just synchronous code, and effectively what we've done is we've created an observable, we've passed an observer into the observable. So this will be it has this sort of relationship where the observable depends on the observer, and since the observable know that it's going to receive an observer, we can pass in the observer here, which we've created, and we can wait for something to happen. So there's three things. We can go next, error, or complete, and when this observable is subscribed to, it can use the methods that that observer has. So all this is doing right now for us is it's consoling, it's logging out to the console this got value x. That's what the observer wants to do when next is called, and then we just pass in 1, and then we have sort of an extreme of synchronous numbers being read out, and that's done through the subscribe method. So what we can do now is we can extend on this idea, and we can just add a you know, like a fake sort of we can use a set timeout, let's say, and this is just regular JavaScript where we know we can take an arrow function, and with the timeout, you know, we might want to have a timeout for say 1 second, and what we can do after that is we might say, okay, we'll have this observer dot next, and then we'll say 4, and now this simulates synchronous sort of code, or asynchronous code. So if we save that and we take a look here, I'll refresh that, so you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, and a second later we get this 4th value here. Okay, so, and it should be noted that not all observables can complete. So like for this example, when we complete, we can say, okay, observer dot complete, and I'll say that I can get a message here saying, oh, we can just call it like that, observer dot complete, and if I refresh that, we get 1, 2, 3, got value 4, then done. So that's this observer method here being in action, and it should be noted that not all observables can complete. So in the case of this observable here, or a HTTP request where you get data and you get it back, or you might get an error, then that can complete because, you know, you get your value back. But if you had, say, an event listener or something like that where you need to click a button, it may never complete. So then that function may, that method may not ever be called. And it should be noted that if complete happens, you can't call observer.next5, for example, like that. And same with error. If error occurs, it just exits out of the observable finishes. So if you show you this, we can see it's done, and then nothing else occurs after that. And that's where error would come in handy, is for a HTTP request that failed or something like that, where something went wrong. We could handle that. Okay, so that is some of the basic concepts of observables and observers, and the ability to recognize an observer to recognize an observable through the subscribe method. So I think what we should do is we should go into a bit more detail about observables. That's sort of like a broad overview. So what we can do is we can okay, let's take a look at the 4 aspects encoded in an observable instance. So these 4 aspects, these are the main sort of aspects that can hold true for any of your observables, and that is the observable itself, the subscription, the execution, and disposing of it in some sort of way. And that can be done in different ways depending on the situation. But the first thing is just creating an observable. So, and let's just comment everything out so we can start fresh. And I'll just copy that again. So, okay, so we can import an observable from RxJS. So this is create observable. I might just put a bit here. Okay, so we create an observable. Firstly, we need to import the observable from the library, and then we can take a look at how we can create an observable. So we've already seen that we can create an observable with the new keyword, the new instance of that object observable. So let's go ahead and create a observable that says hi to us every 1 second. So if we create the observable, and we create that with this new keyword here for the new instance of the observable, and what we can do here is we can say, okay, we can have a function subscribe, and that takes the subscriber, and okay, so we'll have this constant variable ID, and what we'll do is we'll use one of these set interval things again, and for the subscriber, which we'll create in a minute, we can call the next function, and we can just say hi, and this can occur every 1 second. So this is how we would create an observable, and the second core concept in RxJS is subscribing to the observables. So subscribing to observables, and you've seen this before, where you take the observable and then you subscribe to it, and okay, and we can pass in x equals to console log x. Okay, so the key difference between this creation of the observable and subscription to the observable and in the previous example is, in the previous example we explicitly typed out all 3 methods of the observer, and it should be noted that you don't have to have all these. We do need the next one, but the next if you're passing one thing in, it sort of assumes that it is the next observer method being applied. So before when we subscribed, we passed in the whole observer object here. But if we don't pass in the observer object, we just pass in the, the method. That will be the next method. So in this case, for the next, when the observer, so when the subscriber or observer is sort of subscribed to the observable, when the next function is called, it will console log out x, with the x being high in this case. So we might actually just make this a string here like that. So if we save that and we take a look at our console, we can see that every 1 second we're getting this high. Okay, and we've actually, this function subscribe, that doesn't have to be called subscribe, that could be called anything, or we could, like before, have an arrow function, but it's sort of just highlighting that the the subscriber can subscribe to the observable in this same sort of manner as it does here. So yep, that's that. Okay, so when we're calling the observable .subscribe with this observer here, the function subscribe in this new observable here is run for that given subscriber. So each call to the observable subscribe triggers its own independent setup for that given subscriber. So we could, subscribe a second time if we wanted to, and then that would, and in fact, why don't we do that? So we'll do that again, and you can see we get high being printed out twice, and that's a little confusing. So why don't I go console log x plus an exclamation mark here, and you can see that every second we get high printed out, and we also get high with an exclamation printed out. So it's going through each subscription from an observer to an observable runs its course through the data or its values, and that can be either synchronous or asynchronous. So that's creating an observable and subscribing to an observable. The next the third core concept is executing observables, and this sort of code block here, new observable, which takes in the function, this represents an observable execution. So what that is, it's a lazy computation that only happens for each observer that subscribes. The execution can produce multiple values over time, either synchronously or asynchronously, and the three types of values that can be executed are the three that we've seen before. So we've seen next, we've seen error, and we've seen complete. And we've seen that observables, they strictly adhere to the observable contract. So, you can't call next after complete, or you can't call error after complete, because it's not delivered, because it would violate the contract. But what a good idea is to do when you're dealing with, observables and all that, is to wrap our code in subscribe with a try catch block. So that will deliver an error notification if it catches an exception. So let's go ahead and just sort of what I might do is I might copy the code from before, So if I uncomment that, and that, I'll just comment that out here. And so this is relating to executing observables. What we'll do is we'll just wrap this observable with a try and catch sort of block. So what we'll try do is we'll try run these, maybe this one as well. Oh yeah, and this one. But if there is some sort of error, oops, that should be in here. We'll try to do this, and if there is some sort of error, we will we'll just log that error message out. Okay, so we need to catch that error. So if we try to do this and there's some sort of error, we'll call, instead of calling next number saying got value this, we'll call the error message saying something went wrong. Like that. And that actually, they won't actually produce an error, but if you had like a HTTP request and that produced an error, that's how we'd go about catching it and sort of not disrupting our workflow. So that's been mentioned, so that's discussed. And the fourth concept and the last concept with observables is disposing observable executions. So like we've talked about a little earlier, some observables may never end, such as a button click, but the problem with this is it could cause a memory leak. So for example, if you're on a web application and you're on a certain page and that has a observable that's waiting for a click, but it can never end, and then you go to a different page and then you go back to that page, you know, they'll create a second observable and multiple observables if you navigate it to multiple times, and that can produce a memory leak. So we don't want to waste computation power or memory resources. So what we can do is to unsubscribe when we no longer need to be subscribed to the observable. So we no longer need to watch or observe the observable if we go to a different page, for example. And okay, so let's see. So we've subscribed here. So when the observable subscribed is called, the observer gets attached to the newly created observable execution. But this call, it will also return an object, the subscription. So the subscription represents the ongoing execution, and it has a minimal API which allows you to cancel the execution with the unsubscribe method. So let's just go ahead and comment this out. And we'll comment this out as well. And we'll just start fresh down here. So if we import the observable, RxJS, we can create an observable, and we might use one of these this from, and that's from RxJS as well. And what this will do for us is, so we'll need to import that. It can convert almost anything into an observable, so it can import, it can convert this array, so it's from an array and they'll be converted into an observable, and it can convert promises and you know, almost anything really. So let's just make a constant called subscription, and that's going to be equal to the observable, and we can subscribe to that. And what we'll do is for x, we'll console log x. We just need an extra bracket, do we? Oh no, that's that bracket there. And for the subscription, we can unsubscribe. So if we see that in action, this is giving out 10, 20, 30, and we're subscribing. So we create an observable. It was just an array and it is just synchronous, but we've converted it into an observable using from. So from converts almost anything to an observable, and then we're subscribing to that observable through this subscription, and we have to set it to a variable so we can unsubscribe from it. And for that, we're have this console log x, so we can see that we got 10, 20, 30, and then we unsubscribe from it. So we don't actually see the unsubscription, but we're no longer, it's ended, so to say. We're no longer observing it. And one thing to note is that there's also of, and it's similar to from, but of, it converts the, we can see that we got it in an array, 10, 20, 30, whereas from, if we take a look at from again, it outputs the element of the array. So from is sort of printing a one-to-one, each element from the array in the console log, and of is the entire thing. So yeah, we've discussed a lot in this video. We've introduced RxJS, we've taken a deep dive at the observable, and we've taken a look at the 4 concepts of observables that can be applied to any of the observables. And we also set up RxJS through NPM and Webpack and set that up properly. So in the next video I want to discuss some operators so we can give our observables a bit more power.